I bet at one time or another you have gotten totally confused with commercial sewing patterns. I mean to the point where you have wanted to tear it up and throw it out the window. And maybe you did. But I bet it mostly just leaves you thinking, is it me? No, it's not you, it's the pattern. Or at least it can be the pattern. Because even after 25 years of sewing, I still find that there are some things about commercial patterns that are just not wrong, they're wrong to me. They are really infuriating, to make this more dramatic, and really frustrating. And I don't want you to get stuck on these points because you should realize it can be the pattern. So let's go through these. A little bit funny rant and a little bit mostly so you can not get stuck on these really silly quirks that commercial patterns just seem to have. I bet you can relate to some of them and some you haven't found yet. Isn't it such a relief already to hear that it might not just be you? I know it can be music to your ears because patterns are honestly one of the most frustrating parts about starting to sew. We pick them up and we kind of try and learn to sew with them and they can just be so confusing. But as I said, I promise you, it's not always you. There are little silly quirks to the patterns that I just don't technically agree with. And as a trained pattern maker and dressmaker and sewist, I either change, ignore, or delete, or do something different than what the pattern is suggesting here because there is a better way. So hopefully hearing me rant a little about these things will just put it on your radar so that you're aware of them. And then you won't get, you know, when you reach that hurdle or that thing and you're thinking, it must be me. I can't do this. This is so confusing. It's me because this must be 100% correct and accurate, right? No. So let's go through and have a little fun with this. The first infuriating thing about sewing patterns is the listing of finished garment measurements, and they list the back length neck. I mean, what is that? If you're only learning about finished garment measurements and don't quite know what that is, very briefly, it is the size of the garment when it is all sewn up and finished, right? The finished garment measurements. And this is the absolute key to learning how to pick the correct size that you want, not using the body measurements chart. And if you're just thinking, I don't know what you're talking about, I've linked a video down below because I've made it, all the details are there in that video. The infuriating thing is they will list finished garment measurements and then it will clearly state the back length. I mean, who wants to know the measurement from the neck to the back of the garment? Nobody. I want to know the bust, the waist, and the hip measurements. Thank you very much, so I can choose my size. So infuriating, right? Luckily, lots of particularly indie patterns these days are providing us with bust, waist, hip, finished garment measurements because they know this is how we choose our pattern sizes these days, is that we want to choose how big or small it is for us. And this relates to another infuriating thing I have coming up a little bit later. Something that really grates me about the sewing instructions that are often provided is that they will describe the easiest method rather than the best method. Let me explain. So they will very often just give you instructions for the easiest, quickest method that they can possibly explain in little sewing hieroglyph diagrams here, which is fine. Of course, you have to do that. But the thing is they very often miss the finer details that is a much better way to sew it, right? And then you just don't know that there's a better way to do things because you just need to be shown once or a couple of times, but then you know that better way. The other thing is details aren't fully explained, but in, for example, understitching. So those of you that have already seen my video on understitching, you know what I'm talking about. And if not, you should definitely go watch that video. It's like a secret stitch that you absolutely need to know how to do. But in that video, I explain that a lot of patterns or sewing instructions will actually tell you how to do understitching without saying understitching. So they'll tell you some really convoluted way to stitch right sides together, turn over, fold seam allowances under, and do a stitch along the lining or the facing side. And you're just like, okay, trying to follow those steps, right? But then you never understand that that is an actual technique, a thing that you do, and particularly why you do it, that it's called understitching, because then you can take that technique and then you can apply it to all the different areas that you know that you want to do it to. And the patterns that don't tell you to do those, techniques, i.e. back to the, easiest, simplest way again, you can apply it even though they don't. But if you don't know that that actually has a name and it's a technique and it's a thing, it's very hard for you to then upgrade your sewing and your projects as you go along. So that's one gripe. I know you can relate to this one. It seems to me like all commercial sewing patterns seem to think that you need 4 inches of ease on every style, right? So frustrating. Well, I should note, this is obviously not every brand and it's definitely a generalization, but one of the things that we all encounter when we first start sewing is that all of these patterns and things we make end up being like a size or 2 too big all the time. And so again, I've made videos on ease and picking body measurements and explaining that in more detail. So if you need more, I'm going to link all that down below. The thing is, it's called ease, and that's extra room in the garment. That means how much bigger is the garment than your body. For example, this amount here is how much bigger this garment is in ease than my body, right? That's the ease. But a lot of them are a lot bigger than we would want it to be and fit on us. And it's like so confusing and frustrating when you're first learning to sew. This relates back to finished garment measurements and needing those to better choose our size. But fortunately, we are receiving finished garment measurements more, and even more indie pattern companies are understanding that we want to know maybe even how much ease is on the pattern, and it will tell us that. That way you can compare how much ease is on the pattern, so how much bigger that is supposed to be than your body, given if you choose the size that it tells you from your body measurements, then you can compare it to a garment that you have and think, yes, I like 2 inches of ease. I like 1 inch of ease. I like the 4 inches of ease on the dress pattern. That is totally fine, right? But it's about you choosing that. Okay, this one is absolutely infuriating, and I use that word, I mean it. So the very odd notch placements on the patterns. So as a trained pattern maker, I have learnt to put notches in certain places because that's where they're needed for the construction. That's why notches exist. And so I just find all these commercial patterns put them in really weird places. And look, I understand that there's reasons for it and some are valid, but it's still just not the way I want to see my pattern. It's not the best way to do it. For example, they put notches on your shoulder line here. Unless you've actually got ease on a seam this long, which is very rare, you don't need a notch there. And so you're cutting all these weird V's and cuts and all sorts of things that you're making a mess of when you start, when it's not needed, right? And then they miss really important ones. Pretty much the only notches that ever really are the most useful on commercial patterns are the armhole ones. They're always in the right place. You've got the single ones for front, double notches for back, and they relate to the sleeve, and they're always there on patterns, and that is fabulous. Sometimes they'll have some along the lengths of like skirts, pants, things like that, where it's a long one and they'll have, a 1 notch on the front or 2 notches on the back or the 3 for the backs, that sort of thing. And they're quite useful because it helps you determine the back from the front and which ones line up, side seams to back seams and that sort of thing. And they're often there and that's useful. But most of the others, like the squares, the dots and things like that, they should be notches or more explained as to what they are rather than tiny little squares and tiny little circles that you're supposed to transfer to your pattern. Annoying. When you take a close look at like necklines and back necklines, for example, they put a notch next to the center, and then when you open this out you have notches on either side, and then you've got 2 notches, so 2 messy triangles, 2 all sorts of things, when really you want the center back and the center front notched, not one out here. That one's a really big one. And so I won't go into any more detail about where and what, but bear in mind that you want to be doing those center notches for sure. So where your fabric is folded, right on there, because that matches, you can use it for pattern matching. That matches the center of your collars, the center of your facings, the centers of everything. It makes everything easier. I won't go beyond the scope of this video. So if you're looking at the notches and you're thinking all those squares and dots don't make a lot of sense, well, often they don't, and you can replace them with other things, but it is something that when you know why they're there, then you can start doing a notch instead of a little silly square, or eliminating notches that are not needed, right? I don't cut out most of them, but it comes with experience and you will too. So don't get overly frustrated with too many dots and squares and stuff. That will be simplified as you increase your skills, I promise. So infuriating, any pattern that says the words easy, learn to sew, quick. I mean, nothing is easy about these. They're always lying. Well, they're not lying intentionally, but it's not easy. Just because the pattern says easy, it doesn't mean easy. I have my little unique way that I show you how to choose whether a pattern is easy or hard for you. I'm going to link that video down below because it depends on your skill level, what you've sewn before, as to if it will be easy or difficult. Let's add to that list anything that says quick, fast, sew in 60 minutes or less. I mean, you're infuriated with that too, I know, because if you do look, there's always fine print down the bottom that says somewhere sewing time only. And of course, no one ever sewed a dress in 60 minutes or less. Well, maybe someone did, but you know what I mean, right? It is never quick and easy, and it always takes way longer than anything on the packet. We know this. If you want to know why, I have made videos on why sewing is, I believe, 70% preparation and 30% sewing. We'll also link that down below. It's really great to know these things because then you're not thinking like, what? It's supposed to take me 60 minutes. Why am I taking 3 days to do this? It's not you, it's everybody. It's just the little pattern lies that hopefully won't get you stuck anymore thinking that it's you. Okay, and this one is a good one. So why the tissue never fits back into the envelope. No matter how much you try, right? When you pulled all those tissue pieces out and you've just taken a peek, even if you've cut some out, you try and fold them up ever so nicely 4 different ways, and then they never, ever seem to fit back into the pattern envelope. I know, I feel your pain too. I'm one of those people that I try and recrease it on the creases, and it hurts my soul when I have to fold it against the creases. And gosh, when I see those patterns in the op shops that are all just like a ball in the pattern, it makes me want to cry just a little bit. As you can see, it is not you a lot of the time, it is the pattern, and there are so many frustrating things. I have made many, many different videos about using patterns. So if you're at that stage and you found this really interesting and want to learn more about actually using them and getting over these frustrating little hurdles, I'm going to link a playlist down below that'll really help you out. And there's videos on screen here too that I think will be in the right path for you. So tell me down below, what is the most frustrating thing that you find about patterns? I would love to hear it because we may just do a part 2. Happy sewing. Bye.